everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits, the only podcast with old friends discussing old comics with the people that created them. I'm Joe Marcello, joined as always by my partners in crime, Oren Phillips.
Hey, good evening, everyone.
And Mike Farah.
Hello.
So in a second, you're going to hear our latest interview with comic book writer Mike Grell. You may be familiar with his huge, extensive career, most of which occurred at DC Comics. Some of his works include Green Arrow and Green Lantern crossovers. Specifically, one that I love is the Longbow Hunters, which inspired a fair amount of the CW work as well.
Yeah, I know for me, if I have a Mount Rushmore, Mike Grell is right on it. John Sable Freelance was the first independent book I've ever read, and it blew me away. This was like a bucket list thing for me. I talk Mike Grell all the time with my friends. So to actually not only speak to the guy, but to see how cool and personable he is, oh man, it was an absolute treat.
So I know Mike Grell primarily as an artist, I think. He's had a number of iconic covers and interiors as well. But one I do remember is this sort of painterly image of Green Arrow with the arrow sort of in the middle, that's sort of seared in my mind. So more than just a writer, more than just an artist, he's kind of that complete package. And he's another Mike, so we all love our Mikes around here, don't we?
We do.
So without further ado, let's get to it. This is our interview with Mike Grell.
Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm glad to be here. Glad to be anywhere at my age, but
I am very happy you're here, and I know Oren is absolutely about to jump out of his seat that you're joining us, because you are one of, if not the favorite artist of his.
I just noticed that I'm labeled on screen as Mary Thomason.
Yeah, that threw us off.
Because I'm on Mary's computer. I have no idea how to change that.
It's okay. It never shows up when I cut the video.
Oh, okay.
So
all right.
But yeah, I thought maybe someone hijacked the Zoom or something like that. I was like, oh wow, this could be interesting. So first off, I wanted to ask you kind of how we ask everyone the same question: how you got into the world of comics.
Man, by dumb luck, really. As a kid, I wanted to be Tarzan or Zorro. Either one would have been just fine. But really, deep down in my heart, I wanted to be a lumberjack, just like my old man. And when I was 16 years old, he got me a job working in the woods. And as soon as I found out how hard the old boy had been working all those years, I knew there had to be an easier way. So I decided, okay, architect. That's a great job. Get to design buildings, houses. I was really interested in that kind of stuff. I helped my folks pound nails in a house that we built. My mom and dad drew up the blueprints, sat around the kitchen table, watched them work on the drawings night after night after night, and watched the building go up. I thought that would be fantastic. Well, it turns out you have to know math. You have to know what a slide rule is for. I have no idea. I thought a slide rule was one of those things you blow in and it goes. No, it doesn't do you any good. So then I decided commercial art, because it has the word commercial in it, which means you get paid while you're still alive. You don't have to wait until you're dead to clean up, like Van Gogh, right? I've never sold a painting while he was alive, but man, he's rolling in the dough right now, I'll tell you. And then it also had the word art, which means you're not really working for them. It's easy stuff. So then I managed to reach a magnificent grade point average of a D- my first year in college. And faced with the prospect of the draft or enlisting, I chose the heroic way out and enlisted in the Air Force for 4 years rather than take the risk of 2 years in a rice paddy. And while I was in basic training, I ran into a guy by the name of Bailey Phelps, who said, forget this commercial art stuff. You need to become a cartoonist because, are you ready for the big lie? Cartoonists only work 2 or 3 days a week and they make $1 million a year.
Wow. Of course.
Sign me up. Sign me up. I am your guy. Well, in the Air Force, I managed to BS my way into a job as an illustrator. And it was all graphic arts back in those days, nothing computer, all hand done, even lettering. And I took the Famous Artist School's correspondence course in cartooning at the same time. And when I got transferred over to Saigon, 1970, a few months later, a friend of mine, Ed Savage, he and I just celebrated our 50th anniversary as buddies, Vietnam buddies. Ed Savage showed up with a stack of his favorite comics. And in there were things like Tomb of Dracula, right? Gene Colan, and Green Lantern, Green Arrow by Neil and Denny and Dick. Dick Giordano, Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil. And I was flabbergasted. I had turned my back on comics, but at the same time I got seriously interested in girls, which most guys did back in those days, right? And while I was not looking, comics had grown up. Stories were mature. They dealt with real world issues. The illustrations were incredible. And right then and there, I decided that's the kind of work I wanted to do. But I was always geared toward comic strips instead of comic books. And so I worked, struggled. I had 2 attempts at selling comic strips, unsuccessful. One was called Iron Mike, about a hard-boiled private detective, and the other one was called The Savage Empire. Now, that didn't get me hired by anybody in the business, but it got me an introduction through the Chicago Tribune Syndicate to Dale Messick, who was the writer-artist, creator of Brenda Starr. So that's why eventually, when I get around to writing my autobiography, it's going to be entitled Doing Brenda's Body, because that's what I did. I did Brenda's body. She had another assistant who did layouts and lettering, and I would come along and I would ink everything over, make it look finished like Dale had drawn it. Then Dale would come in and draw Brenda's face to give it that special flair. So working in Chicago as a commercial artist at an art studio, I finally screwed up my courage and made the journey, the pilgrimage to the New York Comic Con, Phil Sooling's old show, in 1973. And I expected to take the town by storm. I expected that I would meet dozens of guys from the comic strip industry who would surely want to publish my comic strip, The Savage Empire, about an archaeologist who falls through a time warp and winds up back in Atlantis before it sank. No such luck. They didn't even want to talk to me. I couldn't get an appointment to speak to an editor. But while I was at the Comic-Con, Saul Harrison from DC Comics was reviewing portfolios. And I left a copy of my portfolio with Saul, which contained the first 6 weeks of Sundays and 2 weeks of dailies, plus a complete synopsis on Savage Empire. And as I'm turning away from the table, this older guy, and by older, I mean a creaky old fart about 20 years younger than I am right now. He stops me and says, I saw you showing Saul something. Can I take a look? So I showed him my copy of the portfolio, and he flipped through it, and he told me in no uncertain terms I should get my carcass up to Julie Schwartz's office and show him my stuff. And I said, well, can I tell him who sent me? And he said, tell him Irv. Turned out to be Irv Novick, who was the Batman artist at the time. And so when I did get up to Julie's office, I walk in with my prepared encyclopedia salesman speech that goes, good afternoon, Mr. Schwartz. Can I interest you in this deluxe 37-volume set Encyclopedia Britannica, complete with annual yearbook and calendar? If you get interrupted anywhere along the line, you have to go all the way back to good afternoon, Mr. Schwartz. Well, Julie had obviously been through that mill before, and he let me get that far. Good afternoon, Mr. Schwartz. He said, what the hell makes you think you could draw comics? I ends up my portfolio, put it on his desk, and I said, take a look and you tell me. And he looked through it, called Joe Orlando in. They put their heads together, and I walked out a half an hour later with a script in my hand.
Jeez. Wow.
That's how I became king.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a stroke of luck all the way along the line. For starters, beyond having the great good fortune of running into Irv and having Joe be willing to take me under his wing and give me a script, feed me more work. I happened to have walked in the door as Dave Cockrum is walking out. Practically, we probably passed in the hallway or something like that. But he was having a dispute with DC Comics. And I delivered my first script to Joe, picked up another one. And when I got back home, the phone is ringing and it's Joe. He says, Murray Boltonoff is on vacation and he doesn't know it yet, but he's minus an artist on the Legion of Superheroes. Would you mind if I recommend you for the job? Well, would I mind? I packed up my wife and my dog in our exploding Pinto and driven from Chicago to New York purely on the come, dead bang certain that I was going to get hired, right? Not realizing, like the bumblebee, never read the books. So I never realized how hard it was, how astronomical the odds were against me. I just took a deep breath and jumped, and luckily that safety net was there. So that was the start of all of that. And I've been at it for 73 to 48 years.
Jeez.
Wow.
So far.
So right out of the gate, you are working on Legion of Superheroes.
Yeah.
What's going through your mind at that point? I mean, do you I mean, you're like, where do I pull from? What is, like, what do you do? I mean, I having, okay, I've done this much art. I mean, I know what goes into it in production in my life, but you need to have like somewhere to pull from to create, whether it's art, writing, something like that. Like, where do you just get this inspiration from? You're just thrown to the wolves for all intents and purposes at that point.
Well, my source of inspiration for the Legion of Superheroes, of course, was Dave Cockrum. Murray gave me Dave's sketchbook where he had all the character drawings in their costumes. Mm-hmm. So I had that to go by. But beyond that, inspirationally as an artist, I have to go back to Neil Adams. Credit where credit is due. Neil was the one whose work inspired me in the first place to get into this line of work. If you remember, looking back, every decade has their style. Mm-hmm. The 50s were what they were, right? You had, Bob Kane style. You had Jack Kirby. The 60s got into Ditko and Gil Kane on the opposite sides of the aisle, I guess. The 70s, late 60s, early 70s were dominated by the illustrative style that Neil brought to comic books. The 80s were John Byrne. The 90s, Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane. The 2000s is anybody who can trace a photograph. Not to take away from today's generation, but we've seen things go. It went from anybody who could trace a photograph to anybody who can copy anime, right? Which doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing. The most important thing in comics, even as an artist, is not your drawing ability; it's your storytelling ability. There was a guy came up to me years ago in San Diego, showed me he had taken a sheet of paper, folded it twice, and made a little comic book, and had a cover and gag panels through the whole thing, and he paid it off in the end, and it was funny. It was smart and it was funny. And I said, "You've really got something there." And he went, What are you talking about?" I said, "No, this is really brilliant. You should do this." The next year, he came back and set a copy of his book on my table. He said, "I just want you to see what you started, Stickman."
Wow.
And it was selling like hotcakes. I mean, it's just a brilliant idea. Another one of my favorite examples is in the 70s. Denny O'Neil wrote an adaptation of the Shadow for DC with Mike Kaluta drawing, and it was spectacular. It was elegant, beautiful, stylish, and it sold nothing. Zero. So at the point where it was virtually canceled, they still had commitments for another few issues. So they took Denny and Mike off the book and replaced them with, oh God, I'm going to show my age now. Crap. Johnny Hazard. Frank Robbins. Frank's style was harsh, coarse, primitive. Similar to early Milton Caniff, okay? But the guy could tell a story. He was writing and drawing, penciling and inking, even lettering his own stuff. And by God, you could pick up that book, flip through the pages, and you could tell exactly what was going on the page. And the sales went through the roof. It went from being on the borderline of canceled to being one of the #1 books at DC. So that's just an example. So storytelling is everything. The inspiration, though, I have to harken back. Neil's work was what got me interested in comics. Then I discovered Al Williamson. I had already had experience with Hal Foster and guys like that, and it just went on and on and on. But for me, the inspiration, the artistic epiphany came after I had left DC to go to work on Sable for DC Comics. And I bought 2 books in the same week. One was called The Magic Pen of Joseph Clement Cole. Cole was a turn of the century illustrator who worked on a lot of H. Rider Haggard stories, Conan Doyle stuff, very textured, linear style of rendering. And the other one was called The Pencil by Paul Kelly, who did with a pencil what Cole did with a pen. All detailed textured rendering. and it was like a light bulb went off in my head. So if you, when you're working on graphics for this, if you call up an image of the cover for Sable #1 and Sable #2, it's like night and day. There you go, right there. Yeah, Oren's got it.
Yep.
Right there. Yeah, it's night and day between the first and the second, and they're actually drawn about 6 weeks apart. It lit up everything for me as an artist. Storytelling, I gotta say that my storytelling comes from childhood attraction to Edgar Rice Burroughs, who wrote all these great swashbuckling adventures. And you'll see that in The Warlord. And Mickey Spillane, who was, you give credit where credit is due, okay? In the 1950s, Spillane had 7 of the 10 all-time best-selling books to his credit. And one of them was the Bible.
Oh, boy.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So it's
That's still selling. Not anymore, right? No one reads that. No.
Yeah. No. Can you get that online?
I think you can. They have a graphic novel version of it, actually.
Yeah. I'm not at all surprised. So there's all of that for influence and inspiration as far as generating that work at that time. Man, I was 26 years old. Who needs to sleep, right? Coffee is your best friend.
Yeah, the world is yours.
Yeah, I used to work the sort of the Frank Lloyd Wright method, which was you work until you drop and then you cat nap, sleep for an hour and a half, get up, work another 12 hours, sleep for 2 hours. Work another 8 hours, sleep for 3 hours, work another 4 hours. When your sleep pattern equals your working pattern, then it's time to splurge and sleep like 6 hours in a row, and then get up and do it all again. Pot of coffee in one hand and a pencil in the other. When I first moved out to New York, I met Joe Orlando's wife, Karen. And 2 months later, I ran into her again. And she said, "My God, what happened to you?" And I'm thinking, I had almost 5 hours of sleep last night. What are you talking about? I went in the men's room. I looked in the mirror. It was like, holy crap. Like an image out of EC Comics where the guy sees himself in the mirror, or like a picture of Dorian Gray. What the hell happened? Bags under the eyes, sunken cheeks hollow. Oh my God. Yeah, I worked an average of, I would say, 100 hours a week in my first year. Yep. And as a reward, I made a salary of, I think my take home was almost $14,000, which was $2,000 more than a New York City policeman, and about $4,000 less than a New York City garbage man, which just lets you know where the priorities were at the time. But so there you go. That's the story of how and why. It's been a hell of a roller coaster. I've been fortunate to be in exactly the right spot at exactly the right time. Right. Like the day that I was in DC, and word was going around the office that Denny was going to resurrect Green Lantern and Green Arrow. I went straight to his office and said, "Who do I have to kill?" And Denny said, "Just put the gun down, man. The job is yours." Well, not quite like that, but it was
a Green Lantern fan, by the way. Just putting that out
there. Yeah, there you go. When I was a kid, the first time I saw Green Lantern, I thought that ring was yanking him around, and I thought he must have the strongest finger in the world, right? You're going to go wherever the ring drags you. Never occurred to me the ring is making him fly.
Right.
Yeah.
That's just the pose.
Little things.
Right.
You know.
Right. So that was always the case. Right place, right time. Yeah. The guy who knocked on the door.
I want to ask about when you joined first, because we've had Joe Staten on, John Ostrander, Mike Barron. I mean, the talent group at first, yourself included, was incredible. Were you recruited to go to first, or did you approach them to do some work?
No, I was recruited by Mike Gold.
Okay.
Mike had been a PR manager for DC Comics, and we knew each other through association with the Chicago Comic-Con. Mike was one of the original founders of Chicago Comic-Con. And we had talked back and forth. I had done Star Slayer for Pacific Comics.
Right.
And that came to an unfortunate end, but I was the first artist to sign with Pacific. I had already done a portfolio for them, and that's where they had made their bones initially. I was the first artist to sign with Pacific. Jack Kirby was the second. Neil was the third.
Nice.
Jack's book came out first because Jack could draw 3 pages at the time I've been talking here, right? Mine came out second, and Neil got out, I think, 2 issues of Ms. Mystic before the wheels fell off.
Right.
And they did it a big way. The company was just mismanaged, checks were bouncing all over the place. But Mike knew about Star Slayer, and he called me up and he said, we're starting this company in Chicago called First Comics, as in first comics, then drugs, then the babysitter winds up in the freezer, right? So we've already got Joe Staten signed because he's our art director, but we would like you to come and do something for us. And I said, what? He said, carte blanche, anything you want. And so I came up with a concept for Don Sable Freelance. And it was really based on a couple of things. Number one, I was tired of drawing superheroes in skin tight suits. And I wanted to do something that was set in the real world. I wanted to get a little closer to my original Iron Mike concept, the hard-boiled private detective. And at the same time, I wanted to do something where the nature of the stories would encourage me to do my best work. And so I came up with a concept of a African former game warden, former professional hunter, mercenary, whose family is wiped out by poachers in a reprisal raid. He goes off his nut, hunts them down, slaughters them in the most horrific way, and then falls through the cracks. He becomes a hopeless drunk. And if all you have left to live for is vengeance, what do you do when your vengeance is done? So when he's deported back to the United States, he's putting his life back together. He's still pursuing that violent side of his nature. Basically, he's a guy with a death wish, and he's looking for somebody else to put a bullet in his head because he doesn't have the balls to do it himself. But in the process of this, he begins writing children's books based on the bedtime stories he used to tell his own kids. And they become very popular. And so he becomes a known personality under a pen name. There's no secret identity, no by day the mild-mannered fill in the blank, and by night the dark Avenger. He's essentially the reverse of Batman. And it was popular as hell, and ABC picked it up for a very short-lived TV series in '87. Renee Russo was on screen long enough to make her acting debut. and I'll take credit for that, minor credit. No, I met the lady, and she was very gracious, and I said, even back then when the show had already been canceled and they had to do 2 more episodes, I said, whatever happens with this, you're going to be a big star. And she blushed right down to her toenails and thanked me profusely. And I said, I've got nothing to do with it. It's all you, because when she's on screen, you just can't take your eyes off her.
Right.
So, but the problem with the series was that ABC reversed my reverse, made it exactly like Batman.
Right.
By day, the mild-mannered children's author. By night, the dark Avenger. And man, they screwed it up royally. And for the test audiences, when they did a demographic, it ranked number 1 in the 18 to 35-year-old male audience. So when did they put it on? 8 o'clock on Saturday night.
Right. The Death Wish.
Yeah. Where's your demographic?
Right.
They're not watching TV.
They're not drinking.
Yeah. We started off selling beer and 4-wheel drives, Coors beer and Dodge Ram trucks.
Wow.
2 weeks later, Calgon and Ritz crackers.
Wow.
Oh yeah. It was sad. It was pathetic. But there you go. Such is life. But that led onward. First Comics wanted to pick up other stuff. They needed other stuff in their publishing schedule. So I brought in Star Slayer, and I said, look, I'll write the first 2 issues, but beyond that, I'm not going to be able to write and draw an issue of Sable every month and continue with Star Slayer. So we brought in John Ostrander, who was another friend of Mike Grell's from his theater days in Chicago. The dogs are signaling that apparently the Manson family's coming to call. Forget it. John Ostrander had several successful plays running in Chicago. And Tim Truman, who came from the gaming community, and man, blew my doors off. And they showed me pages. Do you think he'd be okay for this? Like, okay, oh my God, right? Just in incredible stuff that these guys turned out, and they took it in directions that I never would have dreamed of going. They just nailed it, hit it right out of the park. And so beyond that, gold keeps coming back into my life like a bad penny, right? We're the kind of friends who we might not actually speak for a year or even 2 or 3 at a time. But when we do, it's like nothing happened, like no time passed whatsoever. My next encounter with Mike Gold was after my relationship with First Comics fell apart. And I was looking at other stuff, and I get a phone call from Mike saying, I'm over here at DC and I'm editing a line for them. What would it take to get you to bury the hatchet and come back to work over here? He said, is there any character that you like well enough? And I said, well, my first reaction was Batman, because I always felt that I'd done such a crappy job on Batman in the 70s, and I'd like to get another crack at the character. He said, but Frank Miller and I had dinner a week or so ago, and he told me his idea for the Dark Knight. And after Frank's done, you can put a period at the end of the Batman sentence for the next 10 years. Well, so far I'm off by 15 years and counting, right? He said, well, what about Green Arrow? I knew exactly where I lived, boy. Like priming the pump, offering a little kid a candy bar, Which would you rather have? A stick of dentine gum, or would you like to have this big giant chocolate bar? Like, man, I'm in it for that chocolate bar, baby. And he said, well, think about this: Green Arrow as an urban hunter, and that was it. That was what sparked the whole idea for Green Arrow, the Longbow Hunters, and parts beyond. The story plot for the Longbow Hunters was actually kind of funny, because back in the days when I was still doing backup features, Green Arrow and Green Lantern, occasionally the Atom, backup features in Action Comics and stuff like that. I pitched Julie Schwartz a story. Excuse me, I'm boring myself to death here. I pitched Julie on a story that would have a female counterpart to Green Arrow, and I called her the Black Arrow, for lack of anything else. And what she was a Holocaust survivor who had been a little girl in one of the camps. Remember, we're just into the 1970s here, right? So it's 30 years later, but she could be 35, 38 years old and still doing this stuff. Right. And she's hunting down Nazi war criminals who had come over under Operation Paperclip after the war, brought in by the US government, scientists and higher ups and whatever. And Julie looked it over, scratched his chin a little bit, and he said, no, that's not the story. Here's the story, see. It's not a girl, it's a young boy. And it doesn't have a bow and arrow, he's got a sling. And he's the reincarnation of King David. And I went, oh man, that's not the story I want to write. Right. Why don't you just give that idea to Elliot, let Elliot Magan, let him write it and I'll draw it, but I don't want to write it. So my story went in the drawer. And come time for the Longbow Hunters, I went, waste not, want not. And out comes the story, and changed the character from a Holocaust survivor to the daughter of a Nisei, a Japanese American who had been sent to one of the internment camps during World War II. And while he's there, the guards at the camp get wind to the fact that he's associated with the Yakuza. And they have given him essentially $20 million to squirrel away for them. And these guys want that money. And that's where that whole story springs from. For the rest of it, I got a phone call from a New York radio station asking me if I would be willing to come on the air live and discuss how exactly I was able to beat the Iran-Contra drugs for guns scheme into print by 6 months.
Wow.
Because I did.
Yeah.
And so live on the air, I told them the exact truth. All I did was I took the various characters in my scenario, plugged them in to my plot, and then asked what would be the stupidest thing these guys could possibly do if they were absolutely dead bang certain they'd never get caught.
Right. And
that's what I wrote. Well, it about the last year, it has finally dawned on me. I don't know if you've ever seen a movie called 3 Days of the Condor, of the Condor.
Yeah.
Robert Redford, he's a reader for NSA, and they read everything, looking for little clues, little tips, little whatevers. And it dawned on me that since we had a 6-month lead time between the time I wrote the story and the time that it was published, printed, and distributed, it's entirely possible that some NSA guy read a copy of it, We went down the hall to Ollie North's office and went, "Hey, Ollie, have I got an idea for you?" And the guy's even named Ollie. You're going to love this. It's
possible.
It's very possible.
In the world I live in, it really happened. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I want to ask you how, as a writer, you have Green Arrow, and it's a darker story. How did you balance it out to, it's going a certain direction, but you don't want to push it too far to isolate some readers? How did you balance that out?
Actually, once again, at DC, I was pretty much given carte blanche.
Okay.
I had Mike Gold in my corner, number one. I also had Dan Jurgens penciling with Dick Giordano, who is the artistic director at DC, as the inker.
Wow.
And with that power base, we pretty much had a blank check to do anything we damn well pleased. They gave us the keys to the asylum, and I set the tone with the Longbow Hunters.
Right.
There was extreme violence in there. The arrow through the eyeball got everybody. Didn't matter. It didn't matter what else happened in the book. Nobody cared about everybody else getting skewered. That arrow through the eyeball. I did a story. I took a lot of these ideas, came from current events, current headlines. I was living in Seattle at the time, and the gang influence was coming in from LA like crazy. So we did gang-related stories. There was a time when there was a series of gay bashing incidents going on in one of the parks in Seattle. That is a story. So I did another one that was based on a true story about a motorcycle gang from Canada who sold a girl essentially across the border to another gang in the US who sent her down to Florida and put her in the sex trade. When she tried to break away, they crucified her as an example. So we did that in the story. And, oh man, caught holy hell. I had to point out, and I still do, on more than one occasion, that I am not promoting this kind of stuff. I'm just using it as dramatic basis for a story. Yes, women get brutalized in so many of my stories because so many women do. In so many instances, they are the victims. Excuse me.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
I was gonna say the higher ups at DC never give you a memo or anything like that about certain things. They weren't worried at all about blowback or
It was the glory days. It was the glory days.
That's awesome.
When we came up with that story,
yeah,
Mike took it to Dick and said, "You think we're going to get blowback on this?" And Dick said, "Push the envelope." Wow. And we did. Wow. We did. That we took that as okay. That's our encouragement. That he's got our backs, and never look back. Never look back. It's not like that day. No. You send in. I have sent in cover layouts and gotten rave from the editor, and 3 days later get the guys further up the chain thought maybe this instead, maybe that instead. It's all corporate. It's all done by committee. You used to be able to walk in to the office and pitch something. You had an idea for a story. You could pitch your editor. The editor will go down the hall to the publisher and come back with, yeah, we'll do a 6-issue run on this and then springboard it into something else, right? It doesn't happen anymore. I sent in a proposal for a sequel to the Longbow Hunters. I sent it in 5 years ago. 2 years later, I corralled Dan Tidio at a convention and finally got a no. Took 2 years to get a no. Usually a no is instantaneous, right?
Yeah.
So then a couple of years go by and I thought, things have changed, times have changed. Let's give this another whack. And I went to the editor loved it. And then nothing. So after another 2 years, I went straight to Jim Lee, who said, I love it. Let's do it. Let's get paper on it. Let's do it. Never heard another word. So there you go. Everything's done by committee.
Let me ask you this.
I just wanted to jump in. I'm sorry, Oren.
Yeah.
How did so they adapted that story for Arrow on TV for the CW?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah,
Bits and pieces, yeah.
Yeah. Any, did you have any thoughts on that? I mean, obviously, it wasn't really that, but
yeah, I'm bummed out that they only used 2 of my characters and they killed them off in the first season. Yeah. They used Shadow and they used Big Fires. Oh well. But aside from that, though, I will say that I think the series was extremely well done. Yeah. The pilot in particular was like watching a movie. Yeah. I mean, high levels of production value. Acting was terrific. The cast, I can't say enough good stuff about them. And on a personal basis, they are some of the nicest people you'll ever run into. Approachable. Stephen in particular, Stephen Amell, is so good with the fans. I've seen him, ragged ass at the end of a hard day of signing autographs and have someone corral him as he's headed out the door, stop, talk to him, sign autograph for him, pose for pictures, the whole 9 yards. Just very personable people. And I think probably that's what made that series so good, is that everybody was like that. They were all working together on the same project. Everybody glad to have work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, if Longbow Hunters wasn't as well written as it was, and as popular as it was, would a book like The Killing Joke have been given the green light at DC?
What is yeet?
Why is yeet?
Gentlemen, look it up in the dictionary. Yeet is the greatest comic book anthology, independent comic book anthology on the market.
Yeet actually is defined as to hurl or move an object forcefully, or as an exclamation of enthusiasm.
And that's what the comic is. On a month-to-month basis, you get enthusiasm, you get forward motion, you get all the good stuff that the dictionary says you should get from Yeet Presents. Give them some of the artists that are coming up, Oren, or have been in Yeet.
We have great artists like Eric Luna Salazar. We've had Tom Wojciechowski do the lettering. We've had Mike Barron doing a story. We've had a lot of great people. Friends of mine, Dennis Miller, Jason Mink, Mike Jones. The list goes on and on and on. For $5 a month, you too to be part of the Yeet Army.
And you can have it all yeeted at your face.
Look for the link in our show notes to their Patreon and get your yeet on. $5 a month. What else are you going to do with that $5? You're just going to waste it. Give it to Yeet, get some good stories, and yeet it up.
Look at who you're looking at as players, okay? Alan Moore. Right? They're going to pretty much let Alan Moore do whatever Alan Moore wants to do.
Right.
But yes, it was extremely popular. I think Dark Knight and Longbow Hunters did set the tone. We set the bar, right. And that gave the other guys not something to shoot at, but they were able to say, why can't I do this when look what they did back then?
Yep.
And then suddenly take the wind out of the sails for their argument.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Hard to say no.
Yeah.
So one character I wanted to ask you about was Warlord, who I think is a pretty badass character. So much so, I mean, it even made its way to the animated series.
Yeah.
Totally blew my mind when that happened. I was just rewatching that series with my kids, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is Warlord." That's right. Your artwork really complements that world and that character. And it seems like that type that is that I don't want to even say genre, but that world really is kind of your thing.
It's pulp. Okay.
Yeah.
It harkens back to my love for Edgar Rice Burroughs. You have the modern day hero who's transported into a world, savage, primitive, dinosaurs, science fiction, everything works. It's the world at the center of the earth. And it's just high adventure. And that's the whole point of the Warlord. Although I occasionally did get on my high horse, but the whole point of the Warlord is fun. It's why he has a gun, but he still uses a sword. Why not just pull out the gun and shoot the guy, right? I already demonstrated that he doesn't have to worry about extra bullets because he's got that Hollywood endless supply.
Yeah, I was going to say, you got that Indiana Jones moment every time. I mean,
right. So the thing about the Warlord is it was formula in the same way that Burroughs was formula. Start off 2-page spread, page 2 and 3 was always a big action thing to kick everything off. Mm-hmm. And then as you go along, the plot thickens and develops to the point where you pay it off at the end. And I would always, when I had a plot in mind, I would do a short written version of it. And then I would go through and I would number in red, put page numbers in red for each page so that I knew what happened on which page, so that I knew that I was on track as I was writing the thing. Unlike some guys who would start at the beginning and just put a page in the typewriter, and along about page 23, they realize, oh crap, I've only got one page to wrap this up. And believe me, I've been on the receiving end of a script like that, where all the bad guys are lined up on one side of the room and all the good guys are on the other side. You turn the page, and then there's a caption that says, what happened next is too horrible to recount here. And that's the end of the story. Like,
that's a good out.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a guy who wrote himself into a corner and went, oh shit, at the last minute. Yeah.
You know what? It's so bad. We don't even want to talk about it.
Yeah. It's not the same thing, because John Ford was directing a movie and the studio sent somebody out to harass him because he was running behind. And I think it was she wore a yellow ribbon, I think. But the studio comes out and says, you're supposed to be, X number of pages. And Ford says, how many pages am I behind? And the guy said 13. And Ford counted out 13, pulled them out of the script, tore them up, went, we're back on schedule. And he never reshot those 13 pages. Never reshot them. It didn't work out quite that well, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was, as a kid, and I'm just going to gush a bit here. So when I was a kid, obviously, I'm of the age where Masters of the Universe was my jam as a kid. So I remember going to the store, and it was, action figures were more readily available at the time, and it was He-Man, and they had Warlord figures, and they were like right there at eye level, and
The same mold. Yeah.
pretty much the same thing. And it was just, you know, the only difference was Warlord's, you know, headpiece. And I remember my mom commenting on it, like, why doesn't this guy have clothes on? Sorry, I just had to share that with you because I always thought I was talking about it with her maybe about
It's
a
a
couple
damn
of
good
weeks ago.
question, but it's the tropics down there, the
But no,
center
you
of the
know,
earth.
my mother knew nothing about that. And even as a kid, you know, I never really absorbed the, you know, the full details of the character. Like I was aware of it. My older family members would share with me, you know, kind of the full details. But like it, you know, as a child, you don't really, you know, absorb that sort of thing. But like He-Man, you know, you got the deal. But you know, so I'm trying to convince my mother. I'm like, can I get that? And she's like, no, why don't you get the Prince Adam figure? Because he had the shirt on. But anyway, but yeah, I was just, you know, just wanted to share that with you. But like I you know, as a kid, like, you know, just a really solid character. What was you know, creating that, you know, what was that like to you know, to have to pitch that to DC or anything? Like, you know,
I created the Warlord in about 3 minutes. But what actually happened was in the 70s, Atlas Comics showed up on the scene. And the word came around that they were offering creator ownership and paying $100 a page. Man,
wow.
Yeah, at that time, that was astronomical. So I packed up my Savage Empire portfolio, took it over and showed them. And Jeff Rovin, the editor, liked what he saw and said, yeah, we'll do this. And I said, well, do me a favor. I've got commitments to DC and I don't want to blow these guys off. So let me get 2 issues in the can first before you make any announcements. Fine, no problem. So I go from his office, 20 minutes across town to DC. I walk in and Carmine Infantino is waiting for me in the lobby. Jeff Rovin had picked up the phone as I walked out the door to brag that he had me tied up.
Oh, geez.
And, yeah. Hey, Carmine, I got your boy Grell tied up, right? So Carmine says, why didn't you bring it to us? And truthfully, I said, for starters, you guys haven't had much luck with sword and sorcery material. They hadn't. The Fafford and the Gray Mouser went nowhere, right? And I said, and they're offering creator ownership and $100 a page. And Carmine says, look, I can't give you creator ownership because we don't do that here. What I can give you is a guarantee of a 1-year run and our top rate, which at that time was $62.50 per page. And he said, you're gonna have to take my word on this, but Atlas is not likely to be around for very long. And he was right.
Yeah.
Not only that, none of the creators wound up owning their own material. And after the first 2 issues were in the can, they fired all the artists and hired foreigners who worked for $25 a page, right? Worked for half of what US artists were working for at the time.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
yep. That's how a lot of guys made the transition from the Philippines or Spain or wherever.
Right.
How they wound up working in New York.
Yeah.
But so he says, look, why don't you pitch it to me? And if I like it, I'll pass it by Joe and see what he says. So walking into Carmine's office, his phone is ringing. And as I'm going through the door, my brain goes, you dummy. If he buys this, you lose it, right? He excuses himself to take the phone call. In about 3 minutes, I scrapped 99% of the story of Savage Empire, and came up with the idea of, instead of an archaeologist at the center of the earth, in Atlantis, it's U.S.
Air Force.
SR-71 spy pilot who winds up at the center of the earth. And I pull from everything. I had, just a week before, I had finished reading a book called The Hollow Earth. It's still in print. And it turns out that before the turn of the century, I don't mean the 21st century, before the turn of the 20th century, there had been something like 87 different books published expounding that theory, including Jules Verne, Journey to the Center of the Earth, which had been my favorite movie and one of my favorite books as a kid. I read that book like 8 times when I was in high school. So when Carmine asked me things like, what's this place called? I went, Scartaris, which I got the name from the mountain peak that points the way to the passage to the center of the earth in Jules Verne's book. Okay. And yeah, and I changed all the names around with the exception of Demos. Couldn't think of a better villain name than Demos. I still can't. I think I'm going to name all my villains Demos from now on and just be done with it. I mean, I pull things out of the hat. He says, okay, run it past Joe, see what Joe thinks. Joe asked me the only question that stumped me. What's this guy's name? Because I hadn't thought about changing the hero's name, right? Yeah, just call him Warlord, right? So I said, Morgan. He said, what's his first name? He said, no, he says, Morgan who? I said, Morgan the Raider, like Sir Henry Morgan the pirate. And he goes, no, what's his first name? I said, Henry. And Joe said, no, can't use Henry Morgan. Why not? Well, there's Henry Morgan and Harry Morgan already using that name. So you're screwed, right?
Right.
So Henry Morgan is another comedian, but I said, Travis. My brother had just had a baby and named him Travis. And he goes, Travis Morgan. I said, yeah, like the Alamo, Colonel Travis. He goes, oh yeah, that could work. That could work, Travis Morgan. So based on that, I was off and running with first issue special number 8, and followed it up with the bi-monthly Warlord. And I would always drop off pages, and before I would leave the office with the lettered pages to take them home in ink, I would proofread it to make sure there were no glitches. And as I'm turning the pages, I come to the end of issue number 3, and I read the end. I went, Joe, this is supposed to say next issue and then the title. And he goes, Carmine canceled the book. I said, he can't do that. He promised me a year's run. And Joe goes, yeah, he lied. He does that. Like, yeah. So there I am, pretty much screwed, except 3 weeks later, 2-3 weeks later, Carmine's out the door, and in his place comes Jeanette Kahn, who was a very astute bookie. She had been following DC Comics, had studied for taking over the job. She knew her stuff. And one of the things that she spotted right off the bat, when she asked for the publication schedule, she went, where's the Warlord? Turns out it was her favorite book. And,
Nice.
And they said, Carmine canceled it. And she said, Carmine's not here anymore, put it back. So it went back on the schedule. And then when the DC implosion hit, everything that had been bi-monthly that wasn't canceled was booted up to monthly. And that's how the Warlord became monthly.
I wanted to ask you real quick what you thought of the DC #1 special run, because Warlord was really the most successful of that. I mean, he had I think Kirby did like the Dingbats. There was like the Assassin and a few other things.
Yeah, so I think Kirby had a book about millionaire kids who
Yep.
would, who would do
Manhunter.
Yeah. I man, I don't want to speak too ill, but a lot of times what happens when you're given a situation, carte blanche, you can create whatever you like, but you're not going to get to own it. You're not going to get to benefit from it. You have a tendency to not do your best work.
Gotcha.
And I'm guilty of it myself. I created a character that was during a time in it was I think late 80s or early 90s, where DC came up with this mandate that all the writers had to create a new character to feature in the next issue of their book, and DC was going to own that character come hell or high water.
Yeah.
So I created a character that as soon as I sent it off, my brain went, "You dummy, that was a great idea. What the hell did you do?" So very quickly, before the editor ever got a chance to see it, this is back in the days before internet, right? So it was a lot more than just pushing a button. You had to mail it in. I phoned him up and I said, "I can't believe I did this." I was reading it over. I said, "This is just awful. I have a much better idea." And I sold it so well, I sold him a piece of crap instead of a good idea.
Nice.
Did you do anything with that good idea though?
It's still parked.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's
I
yours.
actually I passed it. I did like a lateral handoff to a friend who was going to develop it himself. I was more than eager to help out. I was doing just really fine as far as I was concerned, and there'd be a chance for me to do covers and do a little bit of art here and there and stuff like that. And he never got around to it, so it's back in my court. And I'm not going to tell you what the idea is, but don't be surprised.
That's going to be awesome.
Well, I know Oren's going to have it on his radar because, you know.
There you go.
I'm Mike Grell everything. Anytime I see a book of yours, I have to get it.
Oh, he's been, giddy for the past, week or so. It's like next week, Mike Grell, hey.
That's great. If you check my website today, we just put up an illustration, a layout rough that I did for the Green Arrow Longbow Hunters Saga Omnibus.
Oh, okay.
Volume 2.
Awesome.
It's got a 2.5-inch spine. I mean, good God. Yeah. Book's got to weigh like 8 pounds, something like that.
Yeah, they're getting on a kick of releasing these omnibus sets lately. I mean, I'm gonna get it. I don't care what my wife says, but the Who's Who of DC released not too long ago, which is like ridiculous. Volume 1. I mean, whatever. Oren, I think you had another question. I'm sorry.
Oh no, my other question was, did just because I'm a big Sable guy, did Marvel or DC ever come to you and say any interest of picking up the run again? Because it was a book that really, for an independent book, I mean, it was hot stuff.
Which book?
Sable.
Oh, Sable.
Yeah.
DC never approached me, although we were in talks at one point of doing a Batman crossover with Sable.
Awesome.
And the concept is, it's nuts. But it's really cool.
Yeah.
Sable's real world, right? So he's at home, kicking back, watching TV or whatever, and there's a knock on the door. He answers the door, And there's this guy, well dressed, but all beat to shit.
Yeah.
And he says, I have no idea what happened. I can't remember anything. I don't know who I am. And Sable says, give me your wallet. And he hands him his wallet. Sable pulls out the driver's license. He says, your name is Bruce Wayne. You live in Gotham City. Go home. Right? And Wayne goes, yep, but there's something else. Like what? He goes, he's got the Batman underneath. And Sable's like, oh God. And Wayne goes, yeah, but what if I really am? And,
That would be awesome, man. Oh.
and that concept, it's still there. It still lingers. Well, it got bogged down hopelessly in the lawyer's office. Everybody wanted to do it. The editors were all on board. The publishers were on board. The lawyers said, okay, we have to have these kind of controls here. And what it was that when it came down to the nitty gritty, they wanted 30 days to approve every stage of the book. And we're in the process of doing a book a month, right?
Yeah.
So you can't wait 30 days for approval on the script, on the pencils, on the corrected pencils, on the inks. You just can't do that. You'd be 6 months on down the road before you ever got anything done. And so we tried to shorten it up by saying, how about this? We send you the material, and if we haven't heard from you in 10 working days, everything is automatically approved. Seems reasonable. They came back with, no. Everything that you send us is automatically disapproved unless you hear from us in writing. Like, no, that's not going on. So
I was just say, because they worked it out with McFarlane with Spawn, with Grendel. They worked it, in the 90s. Batman was everywhere, co-star with everyone's like, I couldn't imagine them putting the same brakes on, Image, Todd McFarlane, Spawn were like the hottest thing in the early 90s. Them saying to him, well, we have to da-da-da-da. But that's insane.
Yeah, I mean,
at that point, I think you're talking about the cross-pollination with Jim Lee to begin with. Okay, so Jim is inclined to do stuff like that. In fact, Jim was all in favor with the Sable crossover. Right. But what happens as time goes on, you get into that corporate mindset, and it's not a case of, would this be a fun book to do? It's, wait a minute, I can see how they can benefit from this. How can we benefit from that? Mm-hmm. That will give us a leg up. How can we get more benefit than they get? And that's the way they're looking at it. Yeah. So yeah, it just is what it is.
Yeah.
I wanted to move to another character that you wrote. I'm going to be mindful of your time, but I'd be stupid if I didn't ask you about it. So you worked on Iron Man, yeah, and you made some pivotal choices with Iron Man that, dare I say, shaped the MCU.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
The MCU would not be where it is without what you did. And I'm referring to Iron Man revealing himself as Tony Stark revealing himself as Iron Man.
Right.
So, and
that was my vindication.
As bananas, because I think about the MCU, and more or less, with the exception, I'm going to say Spider-Man, no one really has a secret identity anymore. Like, everyone knows who the super, and I'm sure there's a few here and there, but even like the X-Men, everyone knows who the X-Men is. Everyone knows who Steve Rogers is, Captain America. He and I think the last two holdouts for a while up until that point was Iron Man, and then he convinced in Civil War, Peter Parker to reveal himself as Spider-Man, but that got Mephisto'd. But how was that pitching that concept to Marvel?
It was a snap, really. Tom Brevoort was my editor, and I had already made significant changes in the character. When I took over the book, the suit was all powerful. It was just gigantic. It was basically mechanical Superman. And without stepping on too many toes, Superman to me is one of the least interesting characters because he's invulnerable, invincible. How can you hurt him? Nobody worries about Superman. But so they craft stories where you worry about Lois Lane or you'll worry about Jimmy Olsen or somebody like that. So the suit had become so powerful. I wanted to get back to the old days when Tony Stark was this scientist guy. Tony Stark himself, he was the same shape as the suit, right? He had the shoulders 3 feet wide, a neck that tapered from his deltoids to the top of his head.
It's a lot like me. Yep.
Yeah. There you go. Right. Just the size of basketballs, and he's supposed to be an egghead. No, that's not. So I slimmed him down. I took away a lot of the power of the suit, but I also reinstated that inherent weakness that Stark had, which was that he had to recharge his heart battery every 24 hours or he could die. And I also threw in an extra in there, which is that the suit could run out of power and Stark could use the heart power to power the suit, which would make it a sacrifice, right? He was capable of sacrificing himself, which I did in a storyline where he, for all intents and purposes, uses up the last bit of power in the suit. So when I was pitching the idea to Tom Brevoort, I said, I want to reveal his secret identity because, come on. And he thought it was a great idea, and he ran it past all the powers that be, that everybody got on board with it. And where the wheels fell off was how I revealed it, not the fact that I did reveal it, but how I revealed it. There were two factions. One that felt that it would have been okay if it had been some sort of cataclysmic event that Stark was going to prevent. So he had to reveal his identity in order to save the world from ultimate destruction. But in keeping with my focus on the man inside the iron, okay? Iron Man, yes, the suit protects him, but it also isolates him. And I wanted to bring out that humanity in him. And so I created a storyline where Pepper is pregnant. And Tony sees that baby as a child that might have been his, could have been, should have been his. And because of something that he does in the creation of another villainous type character in the book, not so villainous, but various shades of gray. Pepper is injured and loses the baby, and Stark takes that tremendously to heart. And in the aftermath of that, he's hosting big luncheon, something or other at Stark Industries up there on the deck, however many stories off the street and down below. There's a couple of guys robbed a store and they're making a getaway. And as they come barreling down the street, there's a little boy with his dog who the puppy pulls away, runs out into traffic and about to get creamed. And Stark doesn't even think for a second. over the side he goes, smashes the car to smithereens, saves the puppy, hands it back to the little boy. And all his friends are like, you bastard. You kept that a secret from us for all these years and you gave it up for a dog? And Stark says, I didn't do it for the dog. I did it for him, the little boy.
Yeah.
And that was the whole point of it. And then the fight started between the cataclysmic heroic faction and the human side faction, who thought it was a wimpy way to go out. And the fight spilled over into the hallway at DC, and it wasn't that the editors and publisher felt that it was wrong, but they felt all suddenly on the spot having to defend a decision. And I know Tom went to bat for me because he was one of the ones yelling in the hallway.
Right.
Wow.
And unfortunately, at the end of the day, even though Tom was way up there, he's not at the top.
Right.
And when the voice at the top says, nope, out the door, and I was gone. So a couple of years later, along comes the Iron Man movie, and Robert Downey stands up at the end. I'm Iron Man. I was like, yes!
But look at that. I mean, how badass is that? You worked on that. You shaped that story. It kicked off the whole MCU, and it ended, like those words ended the saga, that whole series of movies. I mean, Oren and I can to attest. We were crying in the theater watching that, you know. So the fact that I will say you did that. I mean, I know it was Robert Downey Jr. saying the words, but still, it was because of you that is.
Thank you very much.
Oh, totally. You're my pleasure, because that's exactly totally what it is.
Marvel is in the process of putting together an omnibus of my Iron Man stories.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
How cool is that?
They got to stop putting out these omnibuses because my kids aren't going to be able to go to college.
I've got no room in my bathroom rack anymore. And it's not the kind of book you want to read in bed, right? You fall asleep, bash.
No, I got a couple of them. I have some of those. I have like the Kingdom Come omnibus, and it was absolute, and the Blackest Night one, gigantic box things.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there reading this. I'm like, this is cool to have, but it's a bit unwieldy. Like I just can't. Like, oh wait, I have it on an iPad. Okay, swipe.
You feel like what you need is like one of those big Bible lecterns.
Exactly.
That the minister uses.
To sit at the pulpit and just like preach to everyone. Well, wham pow, and this is what happened. Mr. Grell, thank you so much.
Yeah,
you're welcome, guys.
I think pleasure. Oren and I could talk to you for another hour or so, but I know like we all have lives and stuff. But
tell you what, let's do this again.
Our pleasure.
All
Our
right.
pleasure, absolutely, because we have other questions, I'm sure. So everyone, thank you so much, Mike. It's been an absolute pleasure. You've been great to talk to.
Thanks, Joe.
It really has. Would you like to plug anything?
Would I like to plug anything?
Yes.
Yes. like Vanna White, and for only $19.95. I already mentioned the upcoming Green Arrow Longbow Hunters saga, which is available for pre-order on Amazon right now. It'll be out November 9th, 2021. And on top of that, we're getting ready to send out the Sable Omnibus #1. I know omnibus again. Omnibuses.
So many of those.
Keep on top of the omnibuses.
Just call it the Big Damn Book.
Big damn book. And there's all kinds of new stuff in that. We did the a Kickstarter to fund it, and went so far over, we're on to another project as well with Baggy the cat. And besides that, let's see, what do I do in my spare time?
Commissions.
I'm the Dark Avenger.
So that was our interview with Mike Grell. That man has got a great hat. I mean, great to talk to. Really made us feel welcome. Kind of guy, I think if we were to go over to his house, he'd, just have us hang out all day. But he was a real pleasure to talk to.
Yeah, this is absolutely amazing. And I learned so much. And his art and his writing has been such a part of my comic book journey. Anytime I see a Mike Grell cover, I have to pick that book up. I have, Warlord books. I've learned about Warlord. Anything he's touched, Shaman's Tears with Image for a little while. So this is a real pleasure.
It's fantastic to hear him talk about his entire career, the insights he has, and his perspectives. Very interesting, as we are wont to say. And, stay tuned. We may have a spin-off interview with the hat. I can't confirm or deny, but you may be seeing more things from the hat. But to wrap up, you know us. We are the Dollar Bin Bandits. If you're watching this on YouTube, we are also a podcast. Please check us out on all of our podcast platforms, or all of their podcast platforms. And if you're listening to us, we're on YouTube. So just search up Dollar Bin Bandits on YouTube. Give us a like, give us a follow, give us a subscribe. And we're also on social. Dollar Bin Bandits on Instagram, Dollar Bin Bandits on Facebook, DB Bandits on Twitter. And if you want to use that old standard email, dollarbinbandits@gmail.com, write us a little ditty, won't you? Until next time.